Thanks for joining. Today, we are going to be talking about the network build scenarios. We're also going to be building out some zone updates.
Slides are frozen too.
Oh, my slides are frozen? Okay, how about now?
Yep, all good.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. Software update issues. Okay. So, all right. Take 3. Here we go. Today we're going to be in the software more. We're going to be talking about building out the specific scenarios. Yesterday we covered software overview, we covered scenario manager, looked at the base file construction and things like that. Today we're going to be looking at specific build options, and we're going to be building out the physical network geometry of this particular build. We're also going to be looking at some zone updates, as well as looking at some filter files. And then we're going to be, in the afternoon, talking about public transit updates and then reviewing scenarios. So we're going to start today with talking about this network build, in which case we are going to be building out a Granville Road extension out to Florida 31. We're also going to be doing a punch through on Del Prado Boulevard, I-75. And then we're going to be creating an interchange at I-75 on the Del Prado punch through that we're going to be building out. And this will involve building the link structure as well as looking at the intersections themselves, the different junctions via the nodes. We're going to be looking at turn penalties, how to assign turn penalties, as well as looking at the geometry of the links themselves. Because Visum is a fully integrated geodatabase with integrated projection systems in the background, so you can use it with specific georeferencing on the spline points. And it's optimized for travel demand modeling as opposed to just design. And you can store true shape networks without any sort of runtime overhead or anything like that. So we're going to be looking at how we can add in specific geometry in accordance with those geodatabases. So the first thing we're going to do is jump into Visum, and we're going to open up the project just like we did before, and we're going to build out the model. The first thing we're going to do is open up our, I'm going to go through the slides first, and then we'll just go through and do it practically in person. First thing we're going to do is we're going to open up the modifications. And in the modification number 2, the network edit, we're going to open up the network, and it's going to have some points of interest in the modification. A point of interest in Visum is just an arbitrary piece of geometry that is used to point out specific objects. And in this case, we are pointing out where the new builds are going to be using the points of interest. And we can use a graphic parameter file to get the settings just right that we want to see. And we're going to go through how to do this practically in the model. But when you open up the graphic parameters file, it'll highlight the points of interest to kind of show where the new builds are going to go in. And then we're going to focus in on our Granville Road extension. Using existing nodes that are already in the network, we're going to connect them using a link. So we're going to draw a link from one node to the next. And then we're going to set some specific details about the node that pertain to this particular demand model. In this case, there are 3 specific attributes: an area type, a facility type, and a number of lanes. You enter those, and then the procedure sequence will take care of the rest. We'll transfer those changes to the other side, and then we'll be done with this first stage. So let's jump into the software, and we're going to do this part practically in person for this first stage of the network build. Okay, so again, you should have your D1 RPM project file. When you open that up, you'll see a bunch of different file folders. And again, you have your base version file, and we have our Visum project database. Again, if you open up the Visum project database, I'll open up the scenario manager tool as well. So I'm just going to drag this onto my Visum instance. And that should open up our project database. I'm going to give everyone a couple moments that wants to open up the file. So I'm just going to pause here for now. And again, just kind of go over the structure of the scenario manager in just kind of a review format while everybody is opening up the project. So again, in our basic settings, this is where we can kind of see the overview of the whole project. We have access to our base network. You can rename your project. This is where you can set your project directories. So you can define where you want to reference specific file types. You can also keep a log of what's been going on in your model down below. So you can always click the plus or the delete and delete entries or manually enter entries as well. Anytime you edit a modification or a scenario or the base version, it should update with information about that. Under the Scenarios tab, this is where you can track all the scenarios that are currently active in your network and which modifications are assigned to those scenarios. And then finally, under the Modifications tab, this is the specific individual modifications that are being made. Scenarios can combine one or more. So we have, in this case, scenario 2 has one modification, whereas scenario 6 has 3 different modifications being added to it. And in this case, you can make your modifications as complex or as simple as possible. Okay. So by this point, most of you should have your model file opening if you're following along. What we're going to do is we're going to be building out our network edit scenario, this scenario 3, in which case we're going to be building out our network edit modification. So we're just going to be doing a physical edit. More often than not, your individual modifications are going to be a combination of a network edit, a zone edit, and a transit edit. We're just kind of breaking them up into different modifications for ease of use for the training purposes. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump into our modifications tab. We're going to click on modification number 2, network edit, and we're going to click the little, there's this button down at the bottom that has a blue circle and a pencil. We're going to click on that to open up the modification. Okay, once we are in the modification, again, just some quick things that I want to point out. Let me get my spotlight tool real quick. Up at the top, you can see what project you are in and what subset of the project you should be in. So you should see this project D1 RPM, and then you should also see modification 2 network edit, as well as the version file. You should also see that you are at edit, that you're currently editing modification 2 network edit in this yellow ribbon up above the network editor. Okay, so again, the first thing we're going to do is we have some points of interest that we want to, that will point us to where the network build is. So we can activate the points of interest by finding the points of interest, the POIs, on the network's object side over here. And there's a little button to the left of POIs that we can click on. If we click on that, it will activate the POIs in the network, the points of interest in the network. In this case, we have a few different sets of points of interest for all 3 of our edits because we put the points of interest into the base file, so it carried over to all of our modifications. So in this case, what we want to do is we just want the points of interest for this particular build. So I'm going to come back into my project directory, and under the shared data, we created a graphic parameter file called the new build graphic parameters. What this will do is this will just visually isolate the graphic parameters just for this scenario that we want to build out. So I'm going to left click, I'm going to find this new build graphic parameter file. Again, this is going to be in our shared data folder. It should be called new build.gpa. I'm going to left click and I'm going to drag this onto my modification window. So again, just left click and drag it onto the modification window, which should open up this read graphic parameters select. And in this case, just make sure you have this read all graphic parameters checked and you'll click OK. So again, in your project directory, just make sure you're finding the shared data folder and then you're dragging this new build.gpa file onto your network. Okay. Just a quick refresher. I'm going to go back out of the project. I'm just going to show again how we can get back into the modification. So again, you should have your project open by looking at this Visum project database file. Open that in Visum. That should get you to this point. And then we're going to click on the modifications. This is important. We're not editing the scenarios directly because scenarios can have multiple modifications. So what we want to do is we want to go into the modifications and edit the modification directly, and then it will update all the scenarios that it is applied to. So we're going to select this scenario 2, or sorry, not scenario 2, modification number 2, and then down at the bottom you'll see this pencil with the blue circle. Once you're in the modification, again, for those of you still getting this open, we're looking at the points of interest. And what a point of interest does is it just points out specific objects or locations. A point of interest can be a single point, it could be with a star, or it could be a polygon, a shape of some kind representing like a park or something like that. It can also be a line. So in this case, what we've done is we used a shape file and we imported the shape file as a point of interest to represent just the network build. You can also use background map or background images. So if you have an image of the project site or something like that, you can always import that. It's just typically project sites on this scale are too big for one image, so you don't get a good enough resolution to see the individual street lines. So in that case, typically we'll import points of interest as a shape file. And again, with the points of interest, you can turn those on by clicking the little star button in the network objects over here. You'll see points of interest. Click the little star, that'll turn on that layer. We also have a graphic parameter file in the shared data folder. New build.gpa. Again, anything .gpa is just a graphic parameters. It doesn't affect your assignment. It doesn't affect your calculations. It's just a visual update. It's just a settings file that saves the visual settings. You can left click and drag this onto our network. And when we read it in, just make sure it says read all, and then you can say okay. And what this will do is this will isolate just the points of interest that we are interested in, which in this case is our network build right here. So again, we have our Granville extension, and then we have our Del Prado punch through. And if you zoom in even further, you can see that we also have our I-75 interchange that we're going to be looking at today. Okay, so now that we have our build site visualized, again, this hasn't actually built the network out for us yet. This is just displaying where the build site is. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to focus in on this extension. We're going to build out this extension first. If I quickly turn off the points of interest just to show what we have in the network, currently we have our Granville Road that goes out to this node right here. And then on Florida 31, on State Road 31, we have a node already linked right here. So all we have to do is extend this roadway out to this node. Now there are a few ways we can do that. We could, if you wanted to, you could just grab this node, make sure you have nodes selected, the nodes object selected. And you can just left click and drag this node all the way over until it overlaps with the existing node on State Road 31. And what you'll see is that you see a little lasso symbol come up. And what this can do is this can link the two nodes together and essentially just combine these two nodes. So I can just say, okay, let's just combine these two nodes, click yes, and now we've extended the road out as such. Right, so that's one way that we could extend the road. If we wanted to keep that node there though, maybe this has some other geometry that we wanted to keep. The other way we could do it is we could select links and we can just create a new link. And we're going to do that today. We're going to create a brand new link so that we can go through all of the configuration of what goes into building out a new link. So for argument's sake, we're going to say we want this node to remain in place. We want this node to remain in place. So we can't just drag it and combine it with the other node. So in this case, what we're going to do is we're first going to select the links object. So make sure you have the links object highlighted. This is very important. If you still have nodes or points of interest selected, when you go to insert the object, it'll insert whatever object we have selected on the left over here. So the first thing we want to do is make sure we have links activated. The next part I want to point you to is in the network editor, in the upper left, you can see these three icons. By default, this middle icon is usually selected, the cursor. This allows us to select existing objects in the network and edit them in certain ways. But what we want to do is we want to create a new object. So we're going to hit this little plus button. And you can see how the network editor name changes. Right now it's on Edit Links. If I click the plus mode, it says Network Editor Insert Links. So this is specifically allows us to create a new object. So by selecting links, we're going to select this plus button to create a new object. And then as far as building the new link out, you just have to go from one node to the next. So in this case, I'm just going to left click on this existing node right here. And I'm going to left click on the existing node on State Road 31. So again, make sure you have links selected, the little plus button. And then it's just a left click and a left click. So we're going to left click over here and then left click over here. In this case, directionality does kind of matter, but also it doesn't really matter that much. If I draw the link this way, I drew it from left to right. So the first direction that we're talking about right here when we select our type number is talking about the eastbound direction. And then the opposite direction is the westbound direction. So in the direction that you drew your link, that's the primary direction. And then the secondary direction is the opposite. After you've built the link, though, it doesn't really matter. For example, if I go back to the edit mode, when I look at this link right here, there's not necessarily a quote unquote primary direction or secondary direction. It's just, it has two directions to it. So you don't have to draw two links connecting the same nodes. It just has two different directions that might have two different settings. You might have 3 lanes on one side and 2 lanes on the other. So in this case, just pay attention to which way you draw the link. because if you're adding 3 lanes going eastbound, you need to make sure you're selecting the correct direction. Now, in this case, we have some predefined link types that you can choose from. But what we're going to do is what we're going to do is go into the details. So once you've drawn the link, again, insert, left click, and then this create link icon will come up. We're going to go into the details. So make sure you click this details button. Now, real quick, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to reposition the network editor so you can kind of see the link as I'm going through that editor. So I'm just going to do this real quick, just so I can put, where did my thing go? Control Z. Click details. There we go. All right. So once you've created the link and you've clicked that details button, it should bring you into the detailed link creator view. In this view, you have access to all of the parameters associated with a link. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I'm going to hit the major ones that are required for building out your model in an effective way. The first thing I want to point you to are this transportation systems selection up at the top. So in Visum, a transport system is basically a subset of a mode of transportation, right? So you have your private transportation, your public transportation, heavy trucks, HOVs, SOVs, things like that. Those are all transportation systems. And by selecting this box, we can pick and choose which transport systems are allowed to utilize this link. So you can block a whole link by removing a transport system. If we don't want heavy trucks going through, we just deselect truck and click OK, and now the trucks are not allowed to travel on this link. Now, in this Florida model, in the D1 model, it's actually even simpler than filling out the rest of these attributes. What we've done is we've created an automated structure in the procedure sequence so that all you have to do is come over to the user-defined attributes and enter the area type, the facility type, and the number of lanes, and then the procedure sequence will come back and fill in all of this other data that is required in the link attributes. So for our purposes, we're going to use the area type number 51. Sorry, just 1 second. I got to find my, okay. We're going to use area type number 51. We're going to use facility type number 46. And number of lanes is going to be 1. And again, this is unique to the District 1 model because our procedure takes these 3 attributes and uses lookup tables to cross-reference the area type and facility type to generate the capacity and the speed and things like that. So you don't have to worry about going through and filling that out. You just need to know what the area type and facility types are when you're building out these links. So again, to get to this point, just one more time, make sure you have links selected, make sure you have this plus button selected, left click on the Granville node at the end, and then we'll left click on the State Road 31, and then we click this details button, go into the user-defined attributes and fill out our area type 51, facility type 46, and number of lanes is 1. Now, the reason you see these things are highlighted as yellow is because if you look on the actual network editor in the background, you see how the red arrow is pointing to the right. That's because we drew the link from left to right. And so the first direction that we are editing is in the direction that we drew the link. You'll notice down at the bottom, we have this option called opposite. So if I click this opposite button, you see how the arrow switches. And now we're looking at the opposite direction. If I come through to the area type and I type in 51, you see how it is no longer yellow. And that's because it has the same value as the opposite direction. So both of these directions, the eastbound and the westbound, both have the same value. And therefore, it's not highlighted yellow. It's a consistent parameter. If it is highlighted yellow, that tells you that the opposite direction has some different setting. And this is to help you debug your network. So for example, say we turn off trucks on the eastbound, but we don't turn off trucks on the westbound. Well, now it's going to be highlighted yellow to tell you, okay, there's something, these are different from each other. It's okay if they're different from each other, but just to be a visual note in case you're performing QC on the model.
Can I interrupt you for a
Yeah,
second?
go for it.
So can you show people how to update that like list of attributes that's shown on that user-defined attribute?
Oh, do they have the full set of lists?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you can come into, if you have if you don't, if it's, it might look something like this where there's a full list of attributes, in which case you might have to scroll around until you find impedance, facility type, things like that. Otherwise, you can customize what's viewed in this list. A lot of these are just other outputs and required inputs that are auto-filled by those lookup tables. So you don't need to worry about them necessarily. So you'll come into this rows option. And in the rows option, you can just type in up at the top, F type. Oh, sorry, first we have to remove all the rows. So on the left are the available attributes that we can assign to this list. On the right is what ones are actually in the list. So if you just highlight this attribute ID, it'll highlight all of them. And you click this little green arrow, it'll remove all the attributes from the list. So the list will effectively be empty. And then we can just find the 3 attributes we want, which in this case are F type, which stands for our facility type. We have our A type, which is our area type. And then we have lanes. You can just find lanes, and we're looking for IMPT lanes. So these are the 3 things you need. And I'm just going to put area type at the top, so you can left-click area type and use these black arrows to move it up or down in the list. So you can reorder the list in that way. And again, how we got to this window was down at the bottom, click the rows option. And then you can just search for the ones you need. In this case, we're looking for A type, F type, and lanes. So just type in A type, type in F type, and type in lanes, and that should help you find them more actively. Once you're done, you just click OK, and that should update your list over here. Okay. Once you've filled out these attributes, though, you don't have to click opposite and refill out the attributes, right? So here, if it's going to be the same in both directions, there's this handy little selection down here. It doesn't look like a button, but it is a button that you can click that says transfer changes to opposite direction. So if we click on this transfer changes to opposite direction, any edits we make will be imposed on the opposite direction. So that's just a quick way to transfer everything over to make both sides of the links symmetric. Okay, once we have the link set up, we can just click OK. And now our link should be ready to go. Again, our procedure sequence is going to take that area type, F type, dual lookup, and configure the speed and the capacity from there, as well as fill out a lot of those other attributes. So if we go back into the links and hit the cursor mode, the little edit mode, We can double click on other links and look at the user-defined attributes, and you see how all these attributes have values in them. And that's because, again, they took the area type, facility type, and number of lanes, and they auto-filled things like the capacity and the speed limit, and all of these other user-defined attributes were auto-filled from those lookup tables. So if we reactivate our points of interest, we can see we've completed our Granville Road extension. Okay. Before I move on, we do have a question about, is there a way to copy and paste from existing links? There are a few ways to do that. You can come into this window, and any attribute you have selected, you can copy and paste it just like you were in a spreadsheet of some kind, like Excel. You can just copy and then double click over here and hit paste. That should work just fine. You can also come into the link list. And if you have two links that you want to copy the attributes, in this case, the attributes are stored in the rows for that link. So this is one link and this is a different link. You can just copy and paste the values down the list. That's another way. And then the third option is we have this quick view window right here. And what this does is this displays certain types of attributes based on the object type so that you've clicked on. So for example, if I click on this link, it shows my area type, facility type, and number of lanes. So I can just copy this and then click on a different link and paste it into the quick view. So that's another way that you can copy and paste. There are a few different ways that you can access the attributes, either directly on the object by double clicking on it. So if we double click on a link, we can directly access the attributes for that one object. You can do it in the quick view as well. Or you can open up the list of all objects, and then you can copy and paste things around in there as well. Okay. There we go. Sorry, somehow I got shifted off of our project build. So I'm going to just zoom in a little bit on our next section of the network. All right, so now that we have the Granville Road extension complete, the next thing we're going to do is we are going to build out our Del Prado Boulevard punch through of I-75. What this will include is we're going to create new nodes at Mellow Drive and Granville Road on the existing links by splitting the links. And by splitting the links, we'll just add a node basically into the center of them. And then just like before, we're going to, we'll split the links there and there, and then we will add a link just like we did before. But in this case, what we're going to do is when we add the link, instead of just clicking on one node and then immediately clicking on the destination node, we're going to click at intermediate points to add spline points to the network in a way that where we can draw the geometry as we go. So that way we get that nice shape of the link that we want. And then again, we'll set the link parameters as we need. and we'll transfer it to the southbound direction. And then after that, we'll look at checking on turn penalties. So before I get into the turn penalties, let's go back into the software and let's build out our Greenville, or sorry, our Del Prado punch through. So the first thing I want to do is, again, we want to have nodes at the beginning and end of our punch through. So in this case, what we're going to do is come down to these links, and we're going to split the links here at this location, and we're going to split the Granville Road at this location as well. So in order to split the link, we need to be able to edit the link. So you need to make sure you have your links selected, and we're going to have it on edit mode. All right, once you have links selected and you're on this cursor edit mode, you're going to just find that location. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. You're going to find that location on the link. You can click on it if you want. You don't have to, though. And then you'll right click at that star, where the star is, wherever your desired split location is. Technically, you can also just right click anywhere on the link. It doesn't really matter. But the key is that you right click on the link so that it says split, and make sure that that link that you want to split is highlighted in red. So again, right click somewhere on the link and you're going to select the split option. When you select that split option, your cursor will now have a little plus button next to it, and you'll see that you have the dotted lines, which represent the new links that will be generated. So if I split and I put that little white box right on the star, you'll see that it becomes a little lasso again. So I can just left click right there on the star, and what this will do is this will create two separate links, and in the middle we will have a node right there at the star. So again, let me do that one more time. Make sure you select the link, right click and say split, and then put the split point right on the star, and then that's how you can create a new node on an existing link. If there is no existing link, then to create a new node, you'll just insert a new node using the insert button and selecting nodes, and then you can just left click somewhere on the network. Down on Mellow Drive, we're going to do the same thing. Make sure you have links selected. Select the link that you want to split, right click, select the split option, and put the split point right on the desired junction location on the star. Now that we have the links split, this has created some new nodes. So if I turn off the POIs real quick, we can see we have a node there and we have a node there. What we're going to do is draw the link from one end to the next. Now, technically, we could add nodes here and here, but it's more efficient modeling to just draw the whole link and then go back and then split it, because then you don't have to switch between adding nodes and adding links multiple times. So in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to select the links object, and I'm going to select the insert mode. Just like we did with the extension over here, we're just going to draw a link from one end to the other. But again, instead of just clicking on one end and going to the other, we're going to left click on the start point at this star, and you can start at the top or the bottom, it doesn't really matter. And then I'm just going to follow the geometry. So you see we have a little white box. As long as I'm not clicking on a node, it will allow me to continue to follow the link or the geometry of the roadway. So I'm just left clicking at these points. And as long as I don't click on an existing node, it should let me continue to add geometry to the intersect or to the roadway. So up to this point, I started by left clicking on this node, and then I left clicked all the way up so that I have a consistent set of spline points for my link. And then when I click on this final node at the top, it will complete the link for me. So again, let me show you that one more time. Insert a node, left click, and then you can add in as many or as few spline points as you want. We can always go back and edit the spline points. So if you accidentally mess up, like I accidentally put a spline point over there, just keep going and we can come back and we can edit that later. You just have to click on the link, click edit mode, and then you can just move that spline point into place. If you want to be more precise, you can zoom in farther, left click, and then when you get to the edge of your screen, like this, if you press and hold the scroll wheel on your mouse, that will let you pan. And so you can pan around using your scroll wheel by pressing and holding it, or you can use the arrow keys on your keyboard to also pan around. Or if you want, you can zoom out, go to the next location, and zoom in using your scroll wheel. So there's a few options, but the key here is that you can be more precise by zooming in and zooming out as needed. In this case, when we create the link, we've created the northbound segment of the link. So we're going to hit details and look at, see how the arrow is pointing northbound. Go to our user-defined attributes. Sorry, I gotta remove the rows real quick. Area type, facility type, number of lanes. And again, just like before, we're gonna use the same numbers, 51, 46, and 1 for now, and then transfer to the opposite direction. So again, we're using area type 51, facility type 46, and impedance, or sorry, number of lanes 1. And just for training purposes, all of our links are going to have these same attribute values. Now, in practice, you're going to have different attribute values for different facility types and different area types. But just for ease of use, so we're not getting too hung up on the specific numbers, we're just going to be using 51, 46, and 1 for all of them. Okay. I'll give you all a minute to get this more or less complete. Again, you don't have to make it perfect. You can always go back and edit the geometry later. If you're worried about your computer crashing or anything like this, up to this point, you can always hit the cache button, and this will take any changes you've made and save it into that modification tracking file, but it won't close the modification for you. So this is just like hitting the save button. Once we've got the Del Prado punch through completed, the next thing we want to look at are, because we had some questions about this in the Q&As yesterday, the next thing we want to look at are looking at checking turn penalties. And so what this is going to do is, most of this model, we don't have turn penalties assigned. That's just taken care of with the capacities and and the rest of the assignments. But if you want to add in specific turn penalties, what you'll do is you'll come in and you can edit the specific nodes at the top, at the Granville junction or at the Mellow Drive junction. So what you'll end up doing is double clicking on the node. Now open up a Junction Editor, and you'll make sure that you have the turns view turned on. And what this will allow us to do is have access to the attributes of the turns for that junction. And so you can see in the Junction Editor up above, it has the 3 links coming in and out of the junction. And it has all the 9 different turns that are going through the junction. And the attributes we are concerned with are T0, which is the travel time, just the base travel time, unloaded travel time from the network. So if there's no traffic, what's the travel time for that turn? You can institute a turn-specific turn penalty by adjusting this T0 parameter. Just like with the links, we can also open and close specific turn types using the tsys set. So just like we did on the links, we can add or remove tsys from a specific turn type. And then we can get more complex with our model by adding volume delay functions based on turn type. We're not really going to go over that in the training today, but if you're interested, you can definitely shoot us an email about it. But basically, each turn type, a through is number 2, a right turn is number 1, a left turn is number 3, and a 4 is a U-turn. So you can add in, instead of having just a base level single value for your turn penalty, you can have a volume dependent turn penalty assigned by the type number. There are 3 ways to update the turn penalties. One is going to be directly to edit in the Junction Editor each turn. You could always open up the turn types list and update them in the list as well. And then you can, the last way is through an edit attribute function in the procedure sequence that will automate the process. And so what you can do is you can basically create an embedded if statement like we have here, where it's looking at the different type numbers. Again, right turn is a 1, a through is a 2, a 3 is a left, and a 4 is a U-turn. You can assign different values based on this formula, or you can create a lookup table. Again, if you're more interested in that, we're not going to cover it in the course today. But if you're interested in adding turn penalties via a lookup table, feel free to shoot us an email after the class, and we can definitely walk you through that process. All right, so now that our Dell product here, actually, let me jump in and just kind of show you in the software where we can access this material. What you'll do is you'll select the nodes option, actually, instead of the turns. You'll want to select the nodes option so that you can double click on one of these junctions. So what you'll end up doing is double clicking on, say, this Granville junction, and that will open up the Junction Editor. So again, make sure you have nodes selected and that you're on edit mode. Double click on a node, and then you can open up our Junction Editor. In the Junction Editor, you can access attributes about the node. You can access attributes about the links directly here, so you can pick specific links that you want to edit. But what we're interested in is in the turns options. And again, you can adjust the initial turn penalty here, what vehicles have access to this turn type. For example, most of the time, trucks cannot do a U-turn, right? Heavy trucks can't do U-turn, so a lot of times people are turning off trucks for these U-turn movements. And what this will do is this will restrict any paths that require this particular U-turn. Trucks will not be allowed to utilize it. And then we have the type number, making sure you have the correct type number for those volume delay functions and things like that. For the most part, though, you're not going to necessarily have to worry about that until you're getting into some detailed inputs at a very specific project level. Okay. Oh yeah, I can.
Prohibition.
Yeah.
I mean, if you want to block it to all
Yeah. Good point, John Son. So if you want to, again, if you want to block a turn for specific transportation systems, you just deselect the transportation system that you don't want to be able to use. Or if you want to turn that turn off altogether, for example, you don't want people making a U-turn right here. You click this TSYS set, and you just say select none, and that will turn it off for all transportation systems, which blocks that turn altogether. And you can see if there are no TSYS, it gets removed from the list entirely. If you want to add it back, you just right click and say show closed turns. And you see how it has a little ellipses here, meaning that nobody is allowed to make that movement, but it still shows the turn as a dashed line. So you can always come back in and add in the vehicles that you want to make that turn.
So real quick, I think, we got one question, but we don't necessarily have a concept on having separate turn penalty file. That was one of the questions that question that was being asked just now. But everything's embedded, everything's integrated to a single file. We don't save that in a separate file. It's just all in there. It's all going to be synchronized with the version file that you already have. Yeah, so there's no separate penalty file.
And similar to how we did on the links with the area type and facility type, you can create a lookup table based on the turn types or number of lanes or whatever attributes you want, and have a lookup table so that the procedure sequence will automatically utilize that lookup table to assign turn penalties based on, because not every left turn is created the same, right? So you might have one that's a protected left or permissive left or something like that, or a in a median or a shared left. So you can have lookup tables for all sorts of different objects, but it's all embedded within the software, so you don't have to have multiple files floating around.
So about the volume dependent turn delays?
Yeah, you can also do volume dependent turn delays. I wasn't really going to get into too much detail in the training, but if you go into your calculate general procedure settings under PRT, and then node impedances, you can look at your turn delay functions here, and we can assign volume dependent turn delays as well. Good. All right. So for the sake of brevity, we're going to move on to the final section of this network build. And then we'll get back to some of these other questions. There's a lot of questions about this in the Q&A session. All right, so the next section that we're going to jump into is building out some one-way links on this interchange. The reason we want to look at this interchange is specifically because it has some one-way links to the on-ramps and off-ramps, and we just wanted to point out how to do that real quick. So here, we're going to go through the same procedure. We're going to split Del Prado, and then we're going to split I-75, which has two one-way links that are median separated. And then we're going to create an off-ramp link from I-75 southbound to Del Prado Boulevard. And how we're going to do this is when we create the link, we're going to check this. We're going to draw it in the direction of travel, and we're going to check the box that says close opposite direction. And then that way, when we hit the details, it will automatically close the northbound direction from Del Prado to I-75 southbound, so that way vehicles cannot utilize those turns or that link, the northbound side of that link. And we're just going to do the same thing on all of these links until we are done. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with a link split on Del Prado. So I'm going to split the link right here at this ramp terminal up at the top, and then I'm going to split the I-75 at the diverge point. Oops, I chose the wrong option. We want to split the link at the diverge point. So now we should have a node on the interstate links, and we should have a node on Del Prado. So now I can insert a new link, and again, I'm going to draw it in the direction of travel. So I'm just going to go from one node to the next. And since I want it to be a one-way link, we drew it southbound. So I'm going to close the northbound direction. So that way When I check this box, it'll automatically close any left turn here, the southbound right turn, this northbound, U-turn and things like that. It'll close off all of those turns that are also associated with this direction. Then I'm going to go into the details, go to user-defined attributes. I'm going to, just like before, type in 51, 46, and 1. And I'm not going to click transfer to opposite direction. I'm going to leave these as yellow because, again, this is a one-way link. So if I go to opposite, it should have 0 area type, 0 facility type, 0 lanes, and no transportation systems on the northbound side. You'll also see that if it's closed, the link has a red arrow, but it's a skinny red arrow, whereas if it's open, it's got kind of like a thick red arrow. So that's another way, visual cue to tell you that it's closed. And then we can just quickly do the other options. Again, we should be getting more familiar with how to split links at this time. So we're going to just split link there, split link there. I'm just going to split the links on the freeways real quick. So you should have nodes at all of these points. And then we can go through and add in our one-way link. So I'm going to quickly add in a one-way link here. And it tries to remember what you did last. So if you do it in this order, it should help because it'll save you some time. So if I hit details, go to user-defined attributes, I can do 51, 46, and 1. And since I'm going to use the same values for all of them, I'm just going to highlight these cells, hit copy, Control-C, click OK. So that when I draw the next link, go to details, go to user-defined attributes, I just highlight them and paste. And then I can just keep doing this all the way around and paste. Oops. And there we go. So now we should have our ramp terminals all activated. It automatically opens and closes links or turns based on whether the attributes are active. So for example, if I click on this node and go to turns, we shouldn't see any turns in our turn list that direct traffic onto that southbound off-ramp. So you see all of those turns are closed. If I say show closed turns, they're not even available because the link is closed, right? And you can see how the link doesn't have a little yellow box next to it. So even if the closed links are closed or are visible, it doesn't even show those as available because there's no roadway for them to turn on to. All right. And that should be all that we need to do with, so we've completed all of our tasks for this build. We've completed our Grainville extension, we completed our Del Prado punch through, and we completed our interchange. So now that we're done with our tasks, we can come in and click the finish button. So when we hit finish, that should save and close our file. Now that we have this network edit done, we can come back and assign it to our scenarios. Right now we have the scenario 3, the network edit option. We have the completed version, but you can always just check off that modification and turn on modification 2. And this just shows you, this is just showing you how you can quickly switch between modifications without having to do a bunch of procedures or anything like that. Finally, one last little note is there should be a log entry that automatically tells us, okay, here's the timestamp and the date. Modification 2 network has been edited by user Levi.button, right? And so it should automatically fill that out, so it keeps a nice log of who's editing what in your project. Okay. All right, so the next modification that is very common within a Visum project that we're going to cover is a land use update. So we're going to take a look at the zones in our network, and we're going to do a sample land use update for two of our zones, zones 4600 and 4601. And this is going to be in modification 3. Again, these aren't always separated out like this. More commonly, modifications 2 and 3 would probably be combined, but we did it for demonstration purposes to show you how you can mix and match different modifications. Quickly going back, one other note is you might see your zone modifications separated out if you have 2 or 3 or multiple different zone edits that you might be trying to mix and match between, right? So you might have a project that has a couple different land use potential options, and you want to sample or run a assignment with these different land use options. So that's why you might separate out the zones from the physical network edit. All right, just like before though, what we're going to do is we're going to open up that modification, and we have a predefined graphic parameter file that just makes it so that it's easier to see the zones that we're looking at. And we're going to go through and look at how we can sample that. But basically what we're going to do is we're going to get to a point where it's going to turn all of the zones that we don't really care about for this particular project red, and highlight the 2 zones that we are going to be editing. And this way, even though we have 5,300 zones in the network, we can quickly find the 2 zones that we want. And then using, just like we did yesterday, we looked at yesterday, using the list layouts, we can find the specific attributes we want to edit. And we're going to go through and we're going to edit all these attributes. So let me just back up to the beginning of this edit real quick. All right, and so let's jump into our project, and we're going to edit our zones. So we're going to come into the modifications tab, and we're going to open up our zone edit modification. So in this modification, we have the same network. Again, it's just the base network at this point. There's no actual physical changes to it yet. If we activate the zones by clicking the zones icon over here on the left, you should be able to see all of your zones populated as such, right? What we can do is, depending on your project, you can come into your zones list, for example. And if you want, you can always create your own attributes, and this is fairly common. You might have an attribute that you want to use or create your own attribute, but basically what you'll do is you'll find an empty spot on the list, typically all the way over to the right. And you can right click, I guess that's maybe Visum, you can do that. Sorry, you'll come into this little attribute button up in the corner next to the list layout. There's this little, looks like a calendar with a screwdriver on it. If you click that button in the zones list, and again, I get to the zones list so everyone can see, here's our network editor. If you right click on zones and say list, it'll open up your zone list for you. When we get to this point, you can click this little calendar button with the screwdriver to access the attributes. And what's very common is that you'll have a user-defined attribute called project ID or something like that. I don't know if there's one in here already called project ID or anything like that. I don't see one, but this is very common to do. You might create a user-defined attribute called project _ID or just project ID. And this might be some sort of integer value. And what this will allow us to do is, if I put this kind of up towards the top, you guys don't have to do this part, this is just a demonstration part. But basically what this will allow us to do is track our zones by specific projects. and then you can filter by the project. So you might have a project ID, 1302 or something like that, and then you'd be able to find the zones based on their project IDs, right? Because you might have groups of zones that are all contained within a specific project. So that's one way that you can isolate these zones. Another way you can isolate zones is by, again, opening up the zone list. And then under one of these columns, you can, if you hover over the column header, for example, the column number, you'll see this little filter button come up. You'll see this little, filter button. And what we could do is we can search for a specific zone ID. In this case, we want to look for zone number 1600. And what that'll do is that will limit the list to the specific search criteria that you put into this filter. And I chose equals, but you can also do between. And you can say, okay, between 4600 and 4601. Oh, sorry, I gotta put bounds. I gotta put the boundaries on it. So it's actually 599 and 4602. And so you can actually find the zones within that region. And then when you highlight them in your list, so if I highlight both of these zones in my list, it'll find them on our map over here. And so that's one way that you can find the objects, in this case, the zones that you want. What we've done is we've gone ahead and created a land use updates graphic parameter file. And what this does is it looks very similar, but what it's going to do is make it so that when we select specific zones, the zones that we don't select or that aren't filtered are going to be turned off or turned red, if you will. We also created a filter. And so one way you can do a filter is on the side. We did it from the list here to filter the list. You can also come over here and you see there's this filter option for the zones on the side. So if you click that, and it's okay, you just click yes through this to get to your filter. Just like we did in the list, you can find the attribute such as the zone number, and the limits would be 4599 and 4602. And so we're filtering these zones, click OK, and it will only, oh, I guess I did with the filters here, looks like we can do 4601, or sorry, 4600, 4601. There we go. So that will have filtered our zones, and you can see how all the rest of the zones have been inactivated by making them like a red outline. And the zones that were in the filter are like a blue color with their ID numbers. So again, you can click the little filter option next to zones. If you right click on zones, you can select the filter option as well. And then you can define your filter criteria, by project ID or by land use size or something like that. Number of residential households, things like that. You can filter by any of the attributes in the list. If you have a filter applied to the network editor, so here we have this filter applied to the network editor, where we just have 4600 and 4601. If you click this little filter, this little red filter with the exclamation point on the list, it will copy that filter over to the list. So now you can see both your list and your network editor with just these two objects. We have this filter preset for you for this specific example. And when you do this, you can go File, Save As, and you can save your filter file as a .fil file. And so what we've done is we've saved this filter as a sample land use update filter. And so now you can just drag this onto your network editor and it will update those filters. So if somebody's working on a project, for example, maybe you filtered out all of the objects within a certain region, right? And so you have all of your links, all of your nodes, all of your public transit lines, all of your stops, all of your zones, all within that project region, and you applied a filter so that it just pertains to that specific project. And then you would have a project-specific filter file that you can load up. Now that we have the specific zones selected that we want to look at, it gets pretty easy from here. What we're going to do is we're going to come into our zones list, and we're going to look at the dwelling population, and we're going to apply the filter to the list. And in this case, the specifics of the zone that we want to apply it to are, let me just find it real quick in the PowerPoint. Okay. Just one second. This one. All right, so the changes that we're going to make is we're just going to add 100 residential households to each one of these zones. And then we're going to add 100 dwelling units, to single-family dwelling units to each one of these zones. And then we're going to update the single-family population by 50 in zone 460, and then a little bit more in 4601. So just to quickly do that, you can come in and just change these values directly. So I'm going to add a 1 there. I'm going to change this to a 2, change this to a 220. This one I'm going to make it 128. And then single family population 132 and 415 respectively. Now there are a lot of other attributes that you will go through and end up updating. It's just for simplicity and brevity's sake for the training, we're just focusing on these 3 just to show how you can make changes to your zones. You can always come back and look at school employment and things like that and filter by these zones and add your employment and your enrollment and things like that as well. And there are a whole host of attributes that you can add to the zones. And all of these will automatically feed back into your trip generation portion of the and trip distribution portions of the procedure sequence. So as far as what does it take to do a land use update, that's really all there is, right? You just go in, you find the zones that you want to update, and then you change the values. Now, there is a portion of land use update that might be you subdivide zones or combine existing zones. And that would just involve you creating or deleting existing zones. Sorry, creating new zones or deleting existing zones. And zones can be contained within other zones. Or you can, as we talked about, one of the questions we had yesterday was about what are these main nodes, main turns, and main zones. You can create a main zone that combines multiple. In this case, how we got this zone file was, I believe it was from a shapefile from the original Cube network. So we just exported that as a shapefile and imported it. And what it does is it will import both the zone geometries, the zone boundaries, and the centroid location. So the centroid location, if I click on zones real quick and I see here, the centroid location is specific to this zone. And again, everything in Visum is georeferenced. So the zone boundaries are also referenced by an import that you can pull from any sort of database file, right? And so as long as you have a shapefile for it, you can import the zones. Okay. Once you have your zones updated and edited, again, you can turn off your filter, and now you can see all of your other zones, and you can click the Finish button. And again, this will save the modification. So now our zones are updated. We're saving this back. It's saving it into that transfer file, that TRA file. And now that this zone edit is completed, we can come back into our scenarios for our zone edit, and we can switch out our zone edit here. And similarly, on this one, we have this 2015 combined all projects. I can uncheck these two and check this one. And so the scenario management and project management is really pretty seamless when it comes to managing multiple different projects and multiple different edits, because you just turn them on and turn them off as needed to help build out your future build scenarios. Again, we're getting a few questions on it, so I'm going to hop back into the zone edit just real quick. If you have external references for, say, a project where they're incorporating new links or incorporating new transit lines or anything like that, what you can do is, if you have a shapefile for it, you can always import a shapefile for your zone geometry, your link geometry, your public transit line geometry. You can always import those as a shapefile. I don't know if I have a shapefile somewhere in my folders, but when you select your shapefile, the next option after you click open will be, what do you want to import it as? And my recommendation would be not to directly import it as a zone yet, or as a link or as a turn. I would recommend importing it as a point of interest first. You can always convert a point of interest to another object. But if you directly import it as a zone or a link, it might get lost in some of your other data. So by first importing it as a point of interest, it might help looking at that. Now that's just for like specific, if you're importing one zone. If you're updating all your zones, then just go for the whole zone update. But yeah, I would say if you're concerned about losing your project or it overwriting something that you don't want it to overwrite, then I would recommend starting with a point of interest, and then you can convert it later from a point of interest into a zone or a link of some kind. All right. All right, and with that, now that we've gone through and built out some physical network, we've built out our a little bit of a zone land use update. We're going to take a quick break, and again, we're going to look at about half an hour for a break, probably about 35 minutes or so. So come back at half past. But if you want to stick around, we'll be answering questions during the break time as well.
Actually, we've got a lot of questions.
Okay.
So I think no break time for you, Levi. Yes, I don't
No,
know.
no break for me, but yeah.
Yes. So I'll give it a shot, and I'll just try to like combine a couple of those questions which are similar, I guess.
No problem.
So first question, I think which you're going to get to, but I think it's going to be worthwhile to mention here is that can we update transit route automatically when will that any modifications that you're going to be making to links, like say like you're going to split it, you're going to update it with whatever attributes that you want it to update. Will that break transit routes, or will that be saved automatically?
I believe transit routes will automatically update because they're more specific to transit stops. They go from stop to stop, and then the nodes are kind of secondary to that. So if you add a node, like split a link and add a node in the middle, it'll just add it to the list of existing nodes between. So I don't think it'll break unless you really try to break it, then it might break. Or if you delete the link entirely, it might have trouble finding a new path. But
yeah. I think it's similar to like term penalties. It's all integrated. Like everything's like attached to each other. So there's no way that like, you can break, you can change one and it'll start breaking the other series of the other things, like seeing dominoes effect or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's all seamless integrated. So
I mean, there are very specific cases where it's like if your bus line goes across a single bridge and then you delete the link that is the bridge, then yeah, that will break your transit line.
But
other than
when that
yeah.
breaks it, like it's going to give you a warning.
Yeah,
like,
it'll give you a
oh yeah,
message,
this
yeah.
will break those. Do you really want to do that as well? So again,
Yeah.
it's like all integrated, fully
Mhm.
integrated. So there's no way that you can break one
Yeah.
or the other.
Yep.
So the second question is like, can you update node numbers or can you define it by yourself after the?
Yeah, you can update node numbers. The default is, let me unpause my screen just so I can escape. Okay, so I'm just gonna go into the base version real quick, just because it's easy. Yeah, so all of these objects that you see here, they are assigned default ID numbers when, so for example, if we imported it, it'll assign it random ID numbers, not random, but like just sequential ID numbers.
In this case, it would be corresponding to the cube AB node numbers.
Yeah, so in this case, yeah, when we imported it, it's linked to the cube ID numbers. But you could always come in and change it as long as that ID number doesn't already exist. So if I try and change this to 7066 and hit enter, it's going to give me an error because that already exists. But you can change it to other ID numbers as well. Same thing goes with the links or transit facilities or zone numbers. And for your sanity and everybody else's sanity, it's probably best to try to make sure that they're consistent with your other documentation, right? So if it's zone 4600 in your documentation, make sure it's zone 4600 in Visum, so that you're not having to have some sort of mapping Excel spreadsheet that says that this equals this. So try to be as consistent as possible and reduce ambiguity. Now, if it gets too complicated, you could always type in a user-defined attribute or something like that. So for example, maybe the counties have different zone numbering systems than the region does, than the whole district. So then you can have like a user-defined attribute that says county ID, right? Or something like that. So you can always add more information. But yeah, the zone, most of these attributes, if they are grayed out, if you see how it has this gray filling right here, that means it's a non-editable attribute. If it's white, then you can edit it. You can change it. So.
All right. So we have quite a few more.
Go for it.
So can we? I mean, you've covered this, but like maybe we can revisit this.
Yeah.
Can we copy a link and road, basically link, that has the same attributes, like copying over attributes from one link to the other?
Yes and no. It's hard to copy all the attributes outside of the list format. You can't just like say, okay, I want this, select a link and copy and paste this link, because this link is tied to two specific nodes on either end of it. So you can't just say, okay, copy and paste this geometry out into the middle of nowhere. But what you'll have to do is draw the link and then copy and paste the attributes.
No, I think what is being asked was like attributes of the links.
Yeah, you can definitely copy the attributes.
You can hit show the control multi-select. So let's say we had the whole corridor. You can control multi-select, and then if there was a certain property, it can be pasted in the quick view over there, and all of those will be updated for the entire corridor. Another option is to, if you hit enter with this selection and you want to set a specific formula, then it's possible to specify a formula for the whole corridor under this multi-selection.
Okay, so I hope that answered the question. Then the other thing is like somewhat similar. So can you show again that how you can edit the geometry of the link, the shape, I guess, after you create them? Basically, like updating that, adding those poly points and.
Oh, okay. Update the poly points. Yeah. Yes. So yeah, if it has poly points, some of these links are pretty straight on. But if it has a poly point, let me actually hit finish out of the base model. I'll go back into that modification, because I don't know if it'd just be easier to find a poly point on this one. Turn on my points of interest real quick. Okay, right here. There we go. All right, so if we have a link that has some sort of spline points to it, when we're in the edit mode and we left click on the link, depending on which side of the link you click on, it'll select a specific direction. But both directions should have the same poly points, and then you'll see these little white boxes that you can then just left click and drag around and move. So that's how you can update existing poly points. The same thing goes for zones. If I turn on my zones and then select a specific zone, like this one, it has these white boxes that I can left click and move. So that will allow us to make those manual updates to the poly points as well. These poly points can also be snapped onto existing nodes. So if you want it to be specific to a node, for example, you want some poly points that'll follow the shape of the roadway, for example, you can do that. In this case, our roadway was imported from Cube, and then our zones were imported separately. So they slightly got a little bit shifted, it looks like. But yeah, you can just snap these onto the roadways if you want the road to be the boundary as well. Can we add links after the poly points are created, or add poly points after the links are created? Yeah, so what you can do is you can right click on the link. If it's an existing link, you can right click and you can say add an intermediate point. And it'll add an intermediate point at the point that you right click. If you want to redefine the whole geometry, you right click and there's this redefine link geometry. And in this case, I'm clicking the northbound, so I see the northbound arrow, so you just got to draw it in the northbound direction. In this case, I'm trying to redraw it, but I could also, have the link do whatever I want, and then I hit enter, and that will redefine the link geometry for me.
All right. So the next question is, can you show how to import a shape to POI? Do we have shape files?
I might have a shape file somewhere. Sorry, gotta find my shape file.
Oh, while you're working on it, like Jayden, I think you can take advantage of this downtime, I guess. So the next question, while he's looking for the shape file, is it easy to make zone changes externally and incorporate them?
Yeah, you can define, basically Visum supports any kind of database interface as well as text file based IO. So if you specify zones, you can incorporate any of those changes either via the direct access or database linkage, or you can write a script that supports that IO batching and batch in attributes like that.
Okay, sounds good. Did you find shape files?
Yeah, I found the shape files for the new builds that we did. So if we want to import those, any sort of shape file, for example, this one is a new link, for example, so it has the spline points for the links. If we want to import that, again, we'll go File, Import Shapefile, and then you just select the shapefile you want to import and click Open. And this is what I was talking about. We could import it directly as links, in which case it'll try to build links in the same geometry as the shapefile, but the trick here is there may or may not be nodes at those locations, and so it might not necessarily put links in at the right locations, or might cause errors. So that's where I recommend starting with points of interest. And then as far as the points of interest go, you can create custom categories. So I created a custom category called the Del Prado Boulevard. And so I have it there, and then I can click OK. Sure. And what this will do is this will allow me to import that shapefile. So here are all the attributes that come from that shapefile. And you can just have it generate new attributes, or you can find existing attributes that match up with the attributes. So this was actually imported from another Visum file, so these attributes already exist. But basically, you would define what these attributes are in Visum, what type of data they are, and then you click OK. Okay, for all. And since I'm importing basically the same shape file of the same POI on top of each other, they come in as a POI, a point of interest. And then once your point of interest is created, you can then go through and see where the geometry is. And in this case, this link already exists, so we don't necessarily need to draw through it. But if this link didn't exist, then what we could do is we could come into the points of interest and we can transfer them into convert active POIs, and we can convert them into zones or links or something like that. So that's how you can convert those, by right-clicking from POI into convert active POI. And you can have different points of interest for different, you have different categories for points of interest. So you can have it for different builds, might have different categories. And so that way you can restrict your network to only visualize specific categories or something like that.
All right, so we have a couple more questions, but we're going to give a time for Levi to breathe a little bit. So we're going to take a break. And when should we be back, Levi?
The scheduled break time is over at 12:30, but I might be back 5 or so minutes early in case people still have more questions.
Okay. Maybe we're going to be back at 3:15,
yeah.
8 minutes later,
yeah.
and we're going to be keep going on.
Yeah.
All right.
Sure.
All right, welcome back, everyone. I guess we can get to maybe 2 questions or what before we start, and we can start going back to our session, I guess. Okay, where were we? Can you show those cases where, if you select something in a list, and is there a way that you can have them zoomed into that particular spot? To that object that was being selected?
So just for simplicity's sake, I've been having the list stacked on top of the network editor, just so it's very clear what I'm looking at. Oh, are we not? There we go. Share screen. There we go. So when I've been showing you guys lists and things like that, I've been opening up the lists like this and just leaving it stacked on top of the network editor. More commonly, what will happen is you'll have this list undocked and put on another screen, or maybe stacked down below or something like that, so that when you select an object, it will actually find it in the network and display it for you. So if I zoom in a bit and then click around on some of these links, you can actually see specifically what object you are updating in the network editor, kind of side by side. So that's just another layout option that you can do. For training purposes, I like to leave the list in front so that everyone is very specifically aware of where I am looking myself. But here, yeah, again, you can detach the list and then redock it on another screen or down below or something like that.
Okay. Okay. So one last thing is, before we are going to move on, is can you briefly show how you could close one direction, when you were, playing around with that link?
Yeah. So there's if you want to close a direction or make it a one-way direction, for example, a lot of times, let me turn off the background map real quick. Freeways or divided highways are drawn as 2 independent links. You don't have to draw it this way, but it's just a common practice to draw them as divided highways like this. Or if you have 2 one-way couplets or something like that, you can draw that. But any link, when you draw it, has 2 directions, regardless of if it's a one-way link or a 2-way link. And there's a few different ways that you can close it, but it all kind of leads back to the same thing. So if I double-click on a direction of a link, again, to close that direction, you'll come to this transportation systems, and you'll just deselect everything in this window, and that will close it. So for example, if we look at this ramp, we have this clover right here that has links going around. We can see that it has transportation systems in the clockwise direction, but if I click the opposite direction, the transportation systems are closed. And so that's where we get the closure of a link. It's not necessarily shouting to you close, it's just saying no transportation systems are allowed to use this link, and therefore any of those transport systems like SOV or HOV that find paths, this is not a valid path for them to use.
Okay. All right, so we can get back to our second part.
Okay, so let me go back into the PowerPoint and then. All right, so the next thing we're going to look at is a transit scenario edit. In this case, I just kind of made up a transit loop that we're going to do around kind of this Suncoast Estates / I-75 corridor neighborhood area. In this case, it's going to be modification number 4. We're going to edit that. We have a graphic parameter file, just like we did before for this new line build out. Where it will highlight the stop locations as well as the proposed transit route. And the 2 objects that we're going to be adding to the network are going to be stop points, which are the locations at which the private transportation and public transportation kind of merge. So if you have some multimodal trips or multimodal paths, where people are, say, walking from their house to the bus and then getting on the bus, or maybe they're driving to a kiss and ride or a park and ride and then getting on a bus. Those are stop points. And then we have, we're going to add the stop points. We're going to add 8 stop points to our loop. And then we're going to add transit lines to the network. And what the transit line is the specific route that goes through these stop points. And so we're going to step through building out these various transit lines, assigning them a transit operator, a fare system. We're going to define the actual line route. And we're going to define 2 routes. We're going to define an inner loop that goes clockwise around this loop, and then an outer loop that goes counterclockwise. And so this is just stepping through all of those different positions, and then we're going to finish it out by creating a headway values so that we can define our timetables, and then all the rest will be taken care of in our procedure sequence. So that's where we're going to be going for the next little bit. Is we're going to create stops, then create a line, and then create line routes, and then we're going to add headways. So the first thing that we are going to do, let me pull it up real quick, is we're going to open up the modification number 4. So I'm going to cancel out of this, and we're going to go into modifications, and we're going to look at modification number 4, transit edit. And we're going to add in our transit line. Okay. So now we have modification 4 open. Again, we have a graphic parameter file in the shared data folder where we're going to, sorry, what is it called? It's called the new line build. I'm going to drag that onto my network editor, and then again, make sure read all is active and click OK. What this does is this just turns off all other objects except for the points of interest that we imported as a shapefile to represent the line going through the network. We also imported a shapefile for the transit stops. So we have stop locations along our transit line. Now, typically a transit line will have more than just these stop locations, but we, just for simplicity's sake and brevity's sake, we're just going to put in 8 different stop points and talk about how to configure those. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add in our stop points. And the key here is that you can add stop points on links, or you can add stop points on nodes. We want to be specific and add our stop points onto specific nodes. And the reason for that is because then they're bi-directional. You can have the counterclockwise and the clockwise loop stopping at the same stop point. If you add a stop point on a specific link, it will be areas, or it'll be direction specific, and we don't want to add a stop point onto a specific direction. So we're going to try to add these stop points onto a node. And what that's going to look like is we're going to select the stop points object, and we're going to select this insert or create object mode. So it should say network editor insert stop points. And it doesn't really matter where you start for this example, because we can always go back and edit the point IDs and things like that later on in the list. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find the stop and just left click on the stop sign at that location. I'm going to left click at this location, but I think there might already be a stop point here, so that's okay. I'm going to left click on this stop sign, left click on that stop sign. Again, I'm making sure that I'm not seeing the purple links, that I'm just seeing, see if I hover over a link, it turns purple. I don't want to put my stop point on the link right now. I just want it to be on a node between two links. Okay. Now I've added my stop points. If I briefly turn off my points of interest as a visual, you should be able to see these little green triangles around our network that are representing our stop points that we added. So these are our new stop points here. The next thing we're going to do is select the lines option. So now that we have our stop points in the network, we want to select our lines. And I'm going to click the add or the insert mode for our lines. Now this is the part that always screws people up, and it even screws me up sometimes, is there's this little text box right here that says create. Make sure you find that. Mine was right here off to the side. Sometimes it's on your other screen or something like that. It's just wherever you put it last. So the key here is that we want to first create a stop line as opposed to a line route. So we want to make sure that this says create line. The other way you can do it is click the edit mode. If you can't find this little box, like it's disappeared or it's somewhere off to the side or something like that, you can always click the edit mode, make sure this says lines, and then go back to the insert mode. But the key here is we want to insert a line. And you want to make sure up at the top that the network editor says insert line, not insert line routes. So you'll see here it says insert lines. Now, the difference between a line and a line route is that the line is kind of the overarching ID for that system, right? So you might have a line, you know, the A line or the red line or something like that that follows a particular route, but you might have different paths in the sense that, you know, one goes clockwise and one goes counterclockwise, right? But they're both the red line. There's just the eastbound red line and the westbound red line. So in that case, the line is the overarching thing that will assign headways and fares, and then the line route specifies the specific path it takes through the network. So we're going to first specify the line itself. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is make sure we have line selected and we're on the insert mode, and then you can just click anywhere on the screen. It doesn't really matter. Just left click somewhere on your network editor, and that will create this new line option. In this case, I'm just going to call this my Suncoast loop. The transportation system, this is our TSYS. It's going to be a local bus. Our standard operator, in this case, is going to be LeadTran. That is the current transit authority in this location. And then our fare system, in this case, we're going to just select free for now. Okay, so again, make sure you select lines. When you hit the insert mode, make sure that you are inserting lines, not line routes, and then you left click anywhere on the screen, and then it'll open up this create line option, and we're creating the Suncoast loop, local bus, standard operator is Leetran, and then the fare system is free. Click OK. Now that we have the line specified, we have our Suncoast loop specified. The next thing we need to do is specify the route that is going to take through the network. And for this, before I move on, I'm going to turn on my links just so we can kind of see the links. You can also turn on the nodes if you want, but it gets a little busy. So I'm just going to leave the nodes turned off. In the create mode, I'm just going to switch from line to line route. So now I'm inserting my line route. Just like before, once you've selected line route and you're on insert mode, you're just going to left click somewhere on the screen. It doesn't matter where, but just left click anywhere on the screen. And we have to first link this line route to a specific line. So in this case, we want to pull up our, if I scroll down to the bottom, we have our Suncoast loop line that we just created. And then for the name, I'm going to call this the inner loop, right? So what we'll see in the end in the list is this will say Suncoast loop, comma, inner. And the direction doesn't really matter right now. We have one direction, and then we're going to create the other direction, which will be the down direction. We can see that since we selected the line, it's pulling the transit system, local bus, and the operator Leetran from the line. So again, I found in the list, I just searched for Suncoast loop, and then I just created the name inner because this is going to be our clockwise loop, and then we're going to create a counterclockwise loop later. Click OK. When you click OK, before we actually start editing, there's this option for parameters. One thing we want to do is some of these links or turns might not be available to local buses. They might be turned off for whatever reason. So what we're going to want to do is click the parameters option, and we'll say use also closed links for routing. And what this will do is this will allow us to draw the route however we want without having to worry about what links are open and closed right now. And then after we complete the route, it'll ask us if we want to open those links and turns for this transportation system. Now we're doing this specifically for this example, but if you do have some restricted access that you don't want this to happen on, then you would say uncheck this box. But for our purposes, we're checking this box so that all of our access is available. All right, now that I have that checked, again, I clicked parameters to get to here. Check this use also closed links for routing, and I'm going to click OK. Now we're inserting a new route. We just find where one of our stops is. It doesn't matter which stop we start at because we're going to do a whole loop. I'm just going to hover over this first stop. I'm going to press and hold left click, and I'm going to just start dragging. You don't have to drag across the links to get there. You just left click and drag from one stop to the next, and it will find the most optimal route to get there. Now, if there are multiple routes to get there and it picks the one you don't want, then what you can do is drag to a specific node. And then you can right click on that node and say fix point. And then you can just left click and drag from that node up to the stop, right? And so you can just drag from stop to stop, observe the trajectory that it's taking. That looks good. Go to there. And now I'm just going stop to stop like this. You could skip stops if it's a pretty straight shot. You could also skip stops. It just won't lock in that location. It'll still pick up the stop though. So let me do that again. I'm going to insert a new line route, select Suncoast Loop, call it my inner circle, click OK, select parameters, click use all closed links for routing, also closed links for routing. And then when we get to the routing option, just left click and drag from one stop to the next. And that should get you to where you are going. If you're uncomfortable being so zoomed out, you can always zoom in to make your selections a little bit easier. You see here, this is where it kind of is doing the route search did something funky, where instead of following the loop around, it gets to this point and it's like, oh, it'd just be faster to go this way and kind of do this. So it's doing a double back here, retracing its steps, going down, turning up, double backing over here, and then coming back. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do undo all fixations. Actually, I'm just going to restart. Sorry, just 1 second. I didn't mean to hit cancel. I just did that out of habit. Enter, click OK. Parameters, all closed links. So this is where it would be beneficial when you go from one stop to the next, before moving on, just right click and say fix point. And you should be able to fix that point onto your route so it doesn't accidentally delete it or reroute from that location. So you can always fix the points to prevent it from doing that weird double back that you just saw happen. Once you have your route defined, select the fix all points option, and that will lock it in so it doesn't, you can't accidentally update it or anything like that. And then you'll click OK. When you click OK, I get this prompt that says edit line course, and you see Suncoast Loop Inner. There are 87 links must be opened for local buses. And that's just because these links weren't previously open to local buses. So what we can do is we can say yes for all, and that will open up all the links and allow that bus route to go through those links. Okay. So now we put in our stops, our stop locations, our stop points. We've defined our clockwise loop. Don't worry about the counterclockwise. We're going to fully fill out our information for our clockwise loop, and then we're going to copy that over and create the opposite direction later. So now that we have our loop created with our courses installed, we're going to switch over to edit mode, and this will give us access to all of the routes within, here are all of the line routes within our network. Here are all of the transit lines within our network. So what we're going to do is select the line routes option. What's going on? That's right. And we're going to right click and edit our new line route. So we're going to right click on the Suncoast Loop option. So again, to get to this window, you were in create mode, switch over to edit mode, make sure you're on line routes. Our newest route is at the bottom called Suncoast Loop. We're going to right click on it and select the edit option. Let me put this off to the side just real quick. Again, right click, select edit on our newest Suncoast Loop line route. The next thing we want to do is we have our loop defined. What this edit mode will do is it's looking at all of the active stop points in our course. So we can see all the active stop points along our course right here. And you can come through and you can name these different stop locations and things like that. But what you'll notice is down in this corner, there were these 3 pre-existing stop points that we don't want to have in our overall new transit loop. So what we can do is we can actually have this transit line. We can just cycle down until we find it. And you can see the little red arrow indicating which stop we are looking at. What we can do is we can turn off the stop points that we don't want the bus to service. So here I'm hitting the little X button until we only have the 8 stop points that we want it to service, and then it'll loop back around the other way. Okay, so now we've defined the stop points, we've defined the line course, we defined which of those stop points along that course is it stopping at. The final thing we need to do is define the headways. We need to define how frequently is this bus traversing this loop. In this case, what we can do is we'll go up into the list menu, we'll go to list, and under PUT supply, we'll be able to find transit lines. What we're specifically looking at is the time profiles. So we can pull up the time profiles for all of our transit lines. If we scroll all the way down to the bottom, we find our Suncoast Loop Inner. And if I scroll over to the right side of it, you can see we have headway off-peak and headway peak. So here we can type in our headways. In this case, our headways are in seconds. So you see some are hourly, some are half an hour, things like that. But here we want to create half an hour headways. So we want it to loop around every half an hour. Or we want a bus to arrive at each stop within half an hour intervals. So again, the first thing we have to define are the stop locations, and then the line, and then the line course, and then finally we're defining the headways. Okay. Once we have our line course defined for one direction, if we want it to go in the opposite direction, then all we have to do is come back to the edit mode for our lines, make sure we're on lines. And then for we have the line is going to be both directions, so we don't want to do anything to the line right now. We want to come to line routes, and we see the Suncoast loop, and this is the inner loop that is going clockwise. I'm going to just right click, and there's an option, where is it? Create opposite direction. And I'm just going to name the opposite direction the outer loop. Click OK. We got to open up all of the links, so I'm just going to click yes. And so now we actually have, here's our inner loop and here's our outer loop. If we look at our line editor over here, it has the same stop locations. If I go back to my time profiles, we have our Suncoast Loop Inner, Suncoast Loop Outer has the same headways. So if you're going to do some sort of loop that has two directions, I would recommend starting with one loop going in one direction and then just generating the opposite, and it'll copy all that data over to the opposite side. All the rest of it will be taken care of through the procedure. So in terms of mode choice and adding these segments to multimodal paths or multimodal choices, all of that is taken care of via the assignment procedures. So all we need to do to put it into the network is get the stop lines or the stop points and transit lines in the network, and then the procedure will take care of the rest. Okay, so let me just kind of show that process all in one go. I'm gonna hit finish real quick, just so it saves it. Don't forget, when you hit the finish button, that saves and closes the modification. I can come back over to the scenario, and I'm going to swap out my transit edit from the completed version to the one I just did. And then I'm going to do that for the next scenario as well. So here's the beauty of the scenario manager. Now that we've done our 3 edits, we've done our network edit, our zone edit, and our transit edit, I can have a combined scenario with all 3 of them together. And if I select this scenario, I can click down below. You see this little weird shape right here that is not blue. If I load this up, what it'll do is it will load the scenario without the assignment results. But what we can do is we can now take a look at this network editor. 20 errors show. This is somebody was asking about how to debug errors in last session. So it looks like some links where something happened with modification number 4. Why is some of this in German? That's the question. Let's try doing this. Let us switch this back to 7 and try loading that and see if that generates the same errors. Okay, so something is happening with the transit line edit that is all of a sudden throwing error. Let's see if everything came in regardless. There's our points of interest. Okay. Lines. So it's not importing the line stop. Oh, it imported the stops, but not the line itself. Interesting. Well, I'm not going to do live debugging. I don't know why this is all of a sudden throwing an error. I'll have to take a look at this and then perhaps send you guys an update on what was causing this error a little bit later. But it looks like something's going on with the links. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm just going to deactivate my transit edit for now. I'm going to reload my scenario and see if the other 2 scenarios will load together compatibly. And they did. So here, in this case, we're just loading up our zone edit and our network edit. So now we have our project with both the zone edit and the network edit updated. And we can take a look at the parameters in here and things like that. But this is a good way to show, even with those errors, that sometimes the modifications might conflict with each other. So I just have to deal with a couple conflicts and go take a look at that with that transit edit. But that doesn't mean that your project is dead. It just means that you can just turn off that modification and debug that specific modification later. and get back to the rest of your scenario. All right. So the next thing I want to talk to us about is, now that we have these completed modifications, we want to take a look at how can we track our changes that we've made in the network? How can we track our zone edits or our network edits or our transit edits without having to know where they explicitly happen? You might be coming in and you might be new to a project, or there might be multiple projects going on at the same time, and you're trying to track what all the changes are. So we have a way of doing this within the scenario manager that's actually pretty easy to do. The first thing we can do is we can take a network and we can load the results between the scenarios by clicking this little blue button. We can also create a model transfer file. And what this will do is this will load the physical attributes of one scenario into the other scenario. And what this will allow us to do is basically say, okay, if we have a completed scenario, how is it different from our base scenario? Or how is it different from some other scenario? So we can go through this process and it'll load in all the objects. And then we'll get this nice little menu on the side that will tell us explicitly how many objects were added or removed from the network of that specific type. In this case, our network edit, we added 32 link objects and we deleted 6 links. When we split those links, it ended up deleting some of them. So we can go through and look at those physical edits. Or if we're talking about transit line, we inserted 2 transit lines for the clockwise and counterclockwise, and it also talks about, you can also pull up specific attributes about that object. So we're going to walk through this process on how we can review these 2 scenarios side by side. And then before we get into select link, we'll go back to the reviewing scenarios. Escape, there we go. So the first thing you'll want to do is you'll want to load up your new scenario. So in this case, I'm going to select my combined 2015, which has my network edit and zone edit combined. I'm going to load the results of it. And you can see it's been calculated, but it's not up to date. That's fine. It just was calculated a few days ago. So here is our network with the default graphic settings. So it's got everything active. So we can turn off our points of interest. I can turn on my background maps. I'm going to turn off my nodes and my zones, just so I have my links visible for now. So we can see the basic network changes, right? So we have this network loaded up. We have this specific scenario 6 loaded up. What we can do to see, okay, what has been changed in our scenario 6? What is new? What is different? What has been added? What has been removed? What we can do is we can go into the File menu. So I'm going to go to File, and we have this Compare and Transfer Networks. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a model transfer file. And then in the model, sorry, that's I don't want to go too fast. So File, Compare and Transfer Networks, and then we have this option, Create Model Transfer File. Okay. So once we click that, it'll give us this menu, and what we want to do is we want to pull data from some other scenario. So in this case, we want the version for the base file to be the base version, right? So what we've done is we've just selected this project base.ver file, and then we're using, so that will load up this base year existing conditions model. And we're going to use the currently loaded network, which in this case is scenario 6. I can see that up at the top, as the target state. So what it's going to do is compare the currently loaded scenario to the base scenario. I'm going to click OK. We can save these settings. So I'm going to say base to completed scenario 6. I'm going to hit save. And after a minute, it'll save that after a couple seconds, it'll save that information out. And now it's asking, okay, what specific types of data do we want to pull over? And so you can limit this. I'm just going to say everything. It's fine. I'm going to click OK. And now what it's doing is it's importing the base network into the background data of our existing network. And for our scenario manager, this is just going to be in our face for the most part. So I'm just going to move this onto my other screen. So it's still here, it's just on my other screen. Here we have our network editor, and we have this model transfer file panel that we can detach. I like to detach it and then put it off to the side like this, so I can still see my network editor and my project file over here, my transfer file. So what this transfer window is doing is, again, it's comparing the base network physical attributes to the current scenario. Yesterday, we looked at how to compare results of different scenarios using the scenario comparison features in the scenario manager, right? We used this, and then we just highlighted 2 scenarios that we wanted to see and clicked this little scales button, and that compared the results. But this is more from a QA, QC perspective, from a reviewer's perspective. We're looking at specifically what objects were added or removed, or what attributes were changed to get us that result. So now what we can do is we can say, okay, let's look at our links. So I'm going to find over here in our model transfer file, I'm going to find the links option. I'm going to expand that. And when I first expand it, it's going to give me a list. It's going to say how many objects were inserted, how many were deleted, and how many were modified. Now, don't get scared by the number of modified objects. That's just because we reran the assignment, and all of the attributes for assigned volume were updated on all of the links. And so that's what was modified. It was because we reran the assignment, and so their assigned volumes was changed, right? And so we can see that. If we don't want to see this many modified objects, when we created that model transfer file, I'll just call this a test real quick, just to be quick about it. It's saving it, it should load up. You can always come into this window and limit that, right? So this has 46,000 updated links. Well, that's because the links, when it was checked, all of these attributes were by default turned on, right? And so we can turn all of these off and only select specific attributes if we wanted to, right? And so that's how you can help limit your process. Like if you have filters for specific projects, you can implement those filters and then just output just those projects. But if we look here, if I click on the inserted 32 objects, I left click there, it will highlight in my network editor where those 32 objects are. So in this case, our project was that road extension and that punch through and that interchange. So now I can see all of the links that were inserted. I can also expand this list and click on individual links and see which individual links were inserted for each segment. Right, so I can cycle through, and I can go as far as to expand those links out and look at specific attributes on those links to see what those attributes are on those links. Similarly, I could look at which links were deleted. So we can look at what link numbers were deleted. And in this case, what links were deleted was we had, if I get my pen tool out, if you remember, we had a link here that we split in the middle. We had a link here that we split in the middle. And then we had some links on the freeway that we also split. So those were all links that were added or that were previously in the network that were split up, because what happens was we create a node there and it draws 2 new links around that node. How do I delete my drawing real quick? Erase all drawings. Okay. So again, some objects were added, some were deleted. Uh-oh, here we go. My computer's starting to get angry at me. It's the end of the day. There we go. If you're using the Zoom, sometimes it can be kind of intense on your computer. So just give it a moment to think, and it'll usually come back. It's fine. Especially since I accidentally clicked on the modified links, so it expanded all the modified links, and that just took a second to think about it. But this is a great way where you can go ahead and take a look at what was inserted, what was deleted, what was modified. For example, if we take a look at our zones, we modified a bunch of zones, but you can look at specifically, okay, what attributes were modified. And if you remember, we modified the single family dwelling units and single family population. So I can expand and see, okay, what was specifically modified, what zones were specifically modified for those attributes. Do I have the old zone edit active? I might have the old zone edit active, my test case before the one we did today. But here you can pull up under the modified attributes, you can find specific attributes that you want to look at, and you say, okay, what zones have this specific attribute modified? And you can go through and pull that data out. So for example, let's go into our transit edit, and I'm going to open up that file and see if it'll open up by itself. It does. So what that tells me is since it didn't open with when I tried to apply it with these 2 edits, it probably has some sort of conflict between one of these with something like numbering of links or something weird like that. So we'll have to debug that a little bit later. But I open up my transit edit. I can come in, file, compare and transfer models. Click OK. I'm going to look to I'm just going to say transit real quick. Hit save. It's going to take a minute. And if I want, I can say uncheck all, and I can look specifically at, okay, I want to look at my lines, my line routes, my line route items. So I'm just pulling up my transit, my stops, stop areas, stop points, operators, so on and so forth. I think that's just about everything. Click OK. And then again, I put this off to the side. I can pull up, okay, specifically, I inserted 2 transit lines. I inserted, oh, this was a test case. I have my Suncoast Estates for my line routes. I have my Suncoast Estates clockwise, my counterclockwise direction, and then I could look at my stops as well. We inserted our 8 stops at these locations. So this is a great way to do QC on your model to track changes that have been made by the developments. Okay. The last little bit of review that I want to talk about is select links. So in Visum, these are referred to as flow bundles, but more commonly they're called select links in the industry. So we're going to look at Visum, how Visum can allow us to perform this operation for review and visualization purposes. So setting up a select link is pretty straightforward. What we've done is we've just created a specific scenario for a particular demand period. So we have in our normal procedure sequence, we have 4 demand periods for the day. We have AM, PM, midday, and nighttime. But what we can do is we can isolate out a specific demand period, such as AM or PM. And so what we're going to do is we're going to create a new scenario, and then we're going to select a procedure parameter set and then run the scenario. And this will show us how fast, how we can run a scenario fairly quickly if it's just the assignment for one time period. And then we'll load in our select link graphic parameters and load in our select link options, execute it, and then we'll be able to pull out our data for our select link. Bars will show segment volumes, and then the pie charts will show the zone volumes and be scaled accordingly. So what that looks like is we're going to start by creating a new scenario. Because again, if we look at our 2015 base year or 2045 forecast year or 2022 forecast year, the default procedure says to run AM and then midday and then PM and then nighttime, and then it combines all those together. So if you want to look at a specific time period, we can create a new scenario. So I'm going to create a new scenario. I'm going to call this my 2015 AM. And then this is my AM scenario. AM assignment only. So now we have this new scenario. Under the parameter, here we have a completed version of this, but under the parameter sets, what we've gone ahead and done is already created for training purposes procedure sets for AM, midday, PM, and nighttime. And what these parameter procedure sets are is if we just go in and create one real quick, and I call this test 2, click OK. What this does is we can come in and just edit the procedure. Otherwise, it's going to pull it from it'll just pull the procedure from the base scenario. But what we can do is we can just come in, and if I collapse all of these groups, we can just turn off the procedures that we don't want to use, right? So I can just deactivate all of these procedures. And then we can just activate just the AM assignment, right? And so we can just pull out one specific part of that procedure. And so that's what we did here. We just are running just a specific assignment just for AM, midday, PM, and nighttime. And so we already have those procedure sets for you, so you just have to pick the one that you want. In this case, we want to select link AM. And then we can execute the assignment. And what it's going to do is it's going to run this one scenario with just that one chunk of the assignment section. So here we can see it's editing the attributes, pulling the capacities. Now it's running the actual assignment. When I did this the other day, it didn't take too long, so hopefully this will run through fairly quickly. I have a completed version, so if it does take a little bit longer than we expected, I can just cancel and continue on. What I'm going to do, just for brevity's sake, so we don't have to watch all the iterations potentially go, I'm just going to click this finish after current iteration. That's not going to be a perfect assignment, but it'll get a result onto the map so we can look at it. just so we're not waiting for however long it's going to take to run all the iterations. It's going to complete the assignment. And now it's going to save out the result files. And it should take us back to the scenario manager. So now we can see that this scenario has been calculated. And again, we just ran the AM assignment. And the reason we're just running the AM assignment is so that we can pull that select link out just for the AM flows. So we're not looking at the whole daily flows. We just want to look at the AM flows for now. Now what we can do is go back in to our scenario and load the results. So I'm going to highlight this result and I'm going to load these results. By clicking that blue box, this shouldn't get rid of the network or the project editor. It should just load up in the background. So again, you select the scenario you want and you click this blue map right here. Now we'll load the network with the assignment result. Now what we can do is we can come in, I'm going to put this off to the side, so it's still here, it's just off to the side. We can come back into the links and we can configure the link graphic parameter bars to display different types of data. But what I'm going to do first is we have a pre-configured graphic parameters files for this called select link graphic parameters. And what the select link graphic parameter does is it has a bar specifically for our flow bundles on the links. And then for the zones, the graphic parameters are set up in a way that they are giving us a chart based on the origin flow and destination flow. So what we'll see is that red zones with red circles are destinations and green zones are origins. And there might be some that are mixed. I don't think there are in this AM model, but there might be some that are mixed. And the proportion of the pie that is red or green will show how many are origin or destination. So again, I created a new scenario. I selected the AM select link procedure set, and then I executed the assignment by clicking this little green play button. And I got through a couple iterations, but then I just hit finish after current iteration, so it just finished up real fast. So it's not a full completed assignment. It just did a few iterations on it, so the gaps were still a little off and things. And then I clicked this little button right here that said load results of the marked scenario to get us into the scenario. And we have a preset graphic parameter file so that now when we go in and select the link that we want to click on or the links that we want to select, it will give us the right graphic outlays. All right, so the next thing that we're going to do is go up into the graphics window or menu. In the graphics menu, there's an option called flow bundle, and this is just Visum select link. And this should open up a graphics tool called flow bundle. So again, graphics flow bundle should open up this menu over here. What we can do is click this new button, initialize, and then I can come into the network and you see my cursor has like a little hammer next to it. I can go find a link that I want to click on. And just for simplicity, I'm going to find this bridge right here. I'm going to left click on this bridge in the northbound direction. When I do that, I can hit the play button to execute. And what this will do is this will pull all of the path files from the assignment So now it's pulling all those path files and it's aggregating them together so that we can see where all of those paths are coming from and going to with the link bars. What paths are they specifically taking? Or if we turn on the zones, we can see specifically what zones are they coming from and going to. So again, to do that in the graphics tool, you go up to the calculate menu, or sorry, the graphics menu, and find the flow bundle option. Graphics flow bundle. You'll hit this little initialize button, and then that will let you select the link or links that you want. So for example, I can click a series of links that represent a path through the network, and it will only pull paths that follow this chain of links. And when I execute it, it will only find the paths that went through this specific series of links. Right, and so you can see, okay, how many people, for example, initialize, took this bridge northbound and then took this bridge southbound. And then I can execute that. And you can see where they're coming from or where they're going to. You can get a little bit more complicated. You can add in first, and then instead of and statements, you can also add in or statements. Let's see, right here. There we go. Add in that, and then an or, and we can do the southbound direction. And so it'll look at the northbound side of the bridge and the southbound side of the bridge, but it'll be an or, so it's not the people that took the bridge north and then took the bridge south. It'll be they either took the bridge north or took the bridge south. And then when we execute it, now we can look at the total flows on the bridge and see where they're coming from and going to. And so you can see, again, we have our zones, and the pies are representing origin and destination trips, right? So you can see some of these zones are much larger demand generators, and others are very big demand attractors, right? And so we can use a select link across this bridge and say, okay, where are all the people coming from and going to as a whole in the AM, right? And we can tell that most people are heading northbound. Some people are heading southbound across the bridge, but it's not quite as common, at least in the AM. And the zones get smaller and smaller as you get farther away from the center. So that's the select link procedure that we can execute.
So while you're here, like while you're in this select link topic, like can you run select link once again?
Yeah.
And like somebody asked a question whether we're gonna get a separate trip table for that flow bundle.
Yeah.
So the answer is yes for now, and we'll show it.
So yeah, here you can see all of the origins and destinations that the select link is associated with. And this is a multi-class select link. So when you run the select link, the trip table that corresponds to the select link is stored as an additional flow bundle matrix. And then if you go to that list of matrices, right-click list. So here all the way in the end, once you run the flow bundle, that 97, 98, 99, those would be the trip tables corresponding to this flow bundle or select link calculation. And since this is a multi-class assignment, we have 3 trip tables stored here, 1 for each class.
Thanks, Chetan. Yep. Any other questions that come up?
Yeah, there was one more question, but I didn't. I don't need to. So can we table for select link volume by zones? Probably that's like what you could do with the trip tables, I guess. Yeah. So, yep, that was the end of it.
This trip table should give. And then if you want to have origins, or destinations and at the zone level, then you can go for a zone listing over here and then set the attribute over here with the origin and destination, which basically is what we are visualizing on the map.
Okay.
And select the origin traffic flow bundle and those attributes and pull them up over here.
And one of the other stuff is that like the file that was being provided to you will not have those procedure settings, procedures and all that we have defined for this select link processes. So we definitely will provide you a bit more updated training file after a couple of days after this training. So you're going to see that in that particular file as well, and go ahead and use that right away. Okay.
All right.
The end of it.
So getting through our select links again. Now we're going to open it up for Q&A. Again, today we talked about network updates, land use updates, public transit updates, some ways to review the model. But also yesterday we talked about some of the software overview, scenario manager overviews, how to review results between scenarios or changes between scenarios from a results perspective, like an assignment perspective. So we're going to open up for Q&A. We're going to prioritize questions about these topics, but if you have questions about other topics and the questions slow down, then we can definitely get to those too.
So hang on one second. So let's see, there are quite a few questions. So we'll see how far we can go. So we're going to start with is with the current model, we connect the zone to the road, and the select link is from TAZ to node connected to the existing adjacent road. How is it with Visum?
Yeah, it's similar in that Visum has an explicit object for a connector. So instead of connector or links being classified as connectors, we just simply use an object called connectors, which is highlighted over here. So it's not that different from, let's say, what you have been familiar with. We store these objects in different layers to enable more of these advanced features like on-the-fly select link and more methodical storage of data.
So, okay, the other question that we've got is could you write the select link volume to the links?
Yeah, it's automatically written. For example, in the graphic that Levi was showing for the select link, the volume over here is the select link volume. So if you want to display it, you can display it using this volume attribute that gets populated once you run the select link.
Yep. Okay. So there's one more question I think on this topic, which is could be answered relatively quickly, which is can you show how a selected node analysis could be done?
It's in the same way. We can again go for flow bundle, create new, and then over here network object type, select node, and then click a node in the network and then run.
And you can have a combination of nodes, links, and
Yes.
those objects.
Yes.
Okay.
So any combination of nodes, links, zones, main turns can be used in this.
So I'll switch the gear to another topic that was actually being asked earlier, much earlier today, but we're going to get to that now, which is first one is when you add a new project, zones or TAZs, which number do I choose to add it, or do we just modify the existing zone system that my project belongs. But what happens if that zone has existing land uses? Can we split? Once again, can we split the zone, or which is the procedure, so we can run the model and get our project trips and distribution? Make sense? Long question.
There seem to be a few questions on there.
So I guess in this case, there isn't really a correct answer, and it depends on how you typically want to structure your data. One option would be to split the zone using Visum's internal split zone feature, where you can click a zone, right-click, and select a zone, right-click a zone, and then use the split zone. And the other one would be simply to add a new zone, as you had mentioned. And then that would be one way to do it. Note over here, though, that in Visum, zones and nodes are separate objects. So you can renumber or number the zones any way you feel like. So if that happens to be greater than a node number, that's not a problem in Visum, because we hold these in different object types. So it doesn't necessitate having the first n nodes in the network as a zone centroid.
Okay, I think that's. Am I missing anything? Can the links be consolidated?
Yes, links can be consolidated with certain automated features we have. If you want to consolidate only a few links, you can merge links by selection, or it's possible to consolidate links also by isolated or individual node deletion, in which case you basically go for nodes and then right click, not on the, just in the network, and then you go for delete or multi-delete. And here you can define what kind of consolidation mechanism you want. And the node deletion, let's say you want just the two-leg nodes or dummy nodes, so-called, to be removed. You can select that option, and then that will consolidate all of those links which have the dummy nodes into a single link. Now, that also, there is treatment over here given for different conditions, because you may have situations where the dummy node is for a good reason, for example, not just a shape point, but to represent a lane drop, a lane addition and such, in which case you may not want to delete that dummy node. So, but it's possible to do it through this mechanism over here.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So last one, I guess, is can you please show how to label the specific attribute of all links or volume on the screen, such as number lanes?
Yeah, so in the links, that's in the graphic parameters.
I think you can just load the template, show it, that might be quicker. There's a GPA template over there in the model files.
Okay.
So you can drag and drop that GPA template further up in the, there should be graphics. Well, I guess you can just show it from scratch.
Yeah, from scratch. So yeah, in the graphic parameters, you can, we've been looking at bars a lot, but you can also look at labels. And under the labels, you can pick between, okay, do you want, what do you want to be contained within the label? In the contents, the default is a name, but you can also pick from any attribute. So it could be a capacity ratio, volume capacity ratio, it could be the assignment volume, it could be the slope. Number of lanes was the example, so I'm just going to search number of lanes.
In this case, it would be IMPT lanes.
Okay. Then you click OK. Wait, I gotta make sure that the labels are turned on. So
links.
Where?
Links.
Draw link labels. There we go. Click OK. So now you can quickly pan around and pick it out and stuff like that. And then if this is what you want to see, you can always come up to graphic parameters and go File, Save File As Graphic Parameters, and then just say, you know, link labels underscore lanes. And then it'll save that info for you.
All right, I guess that concludes our training or workshop. Thanks for everyone. Thanks for joining. And we're gonna send maybe a follow-up email on that with some detailed information in next couple of days. Again, thanks for joining and have fun with Visum. See you later.